So welcome back, Indianapolis Healthplex members. We thank you for joining our broadcast. We'd like to welcome Chris and Adnan to the show. Thanks for having you guys. We're talking about neurology and some different programs that we have here at Indianapolis Healthplex. So I know, Adnan, this is the first time on the podcast. Can you just talk to me about who you are and tell us a little bit about Adnan, how you got here?
Sure. My name is Adnan Hyder. I'm the general manager of the Indianapolis Healthplex. And I've held that position since January of 2019. But I've been a fitness nerd my whole life. I've been an athlete early on and carried that on into actually being a personal trainer. And then through, creating comprehensive 4 to 6 week programs and not just examining a client's goals, but also getting down to their limitations. And that's what we'll talk about today in terms of creating the safest and most efficient way for them to get to their goals. But I've been a fitness director. I've now become a general manager here. I've worked for Joan Servas and the Saturday Evening Post, and I'm very excited to bring everything that I've learned on the West Coast here to Indianapolis Healthplex.
My name is Chris Lanning, and I briefly touched on my background in the last podcast that we shared, but for those that are just kind of jumping into it in this segment, I first started at the University of Indianapolis, so not too far from here. Played tennis there, kind of like Adnan, loved being in sports, was an athlete myself in college, and just loved the fitness industry in general and staying fit. Was a nerd like Adnan here is about just research in general and staying up to date on different health topics. And after I got done with my exercise science degree there at UIndy, most recently finished my doctorate in physical therapy in May. And that just allowed me to kind of get a broader perspective of looking at someone and not only their goals like Adnan mentioned, but really gearing our programming that is efficient to reach those goals in a quicker way. So I'm really excited to have Adnan here. He and we have a lot of really in-depth conversations, a lot about programming, and we nerd out a lot, and it's a lot of fun. And so that's why I wanted to bring him on today, because he shares a wealth of knowledge with us as well. And so we kind of talked a little bit briefly in the last segment about the functional movement screen that we do here at the Indianapolis Healthplex, but I want to talk in depth more about it and just how not only can we link it to the client's goals, but then we can also program based off that 4 to 6 weeks and like how that's efficient. So just talk a little bit about that and what success you've had with the functional movement screen.
Yeah, well, if you've been a member at the Indianapolis Healthplex since January, you've probably noticed a lot of new members and even existing members going through a unique version of a movement screen, and that's the functional movement screen that you're referring to. And it is a series of 7 different movements, and it's designed to identify any risks that have to do with mobility and stability in the major joints, and it'll also identify any asymmetries within bilateral joints that could potentially lead to injury. So as I said earlier, it's important that we consider a client's goals and help them get to those goals in the safest and most efficient way. But it's important to also take into consideration their limitations. And rather than put a movement on top of a dysfunction, what we want to do is we want to correct that dysfunction the right way. And then from there, ultimately lead into strength training and strengthening that joint. So all of this kind of goes into your program when you are personal training with one of our trainers here at the Indianapolis Healthplex. The best way that I say is essentially in the same way you go to a primary care physician's office and you see the 3 different charts of the skeletal system, you see the muscular system, and then you see the nervous system. It really does take all 3 considerations to create a comprehensive program to get someone to their fitness goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what sets our training staff apart and our facility apart, is our ability to customize and make everything individualized based off the functional movement screen and what it does tell us. So, like you mentioned, a lot of clients that I work with, they have flexibility issues as far as hamstring and stuff like that goes, or balance issues. And so we're able to really kind of narrow down in a funnel system through this functional movement screen and work on things that they're good at, but really focus on also things that they're the weakest on and score the weakest on. Absolutely. And so, people's perceptions of personal training are so different.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that too, and how, someone that maybe they're 65 years old and they want to work on balance training and strength training, how that can still fit in with our concept here at the Indianapolis Healthplex. So
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the money. You know, the field is ever changing, and there's so many unique opinions on how to get to someone's goals. But you know, it really brings me to Ralph Waldo Emerson's famous quote of saying, "As to methods there are many, but principles there are few." So as personal trainers or fitness professionals, it's important that we come together on those common principles. Like there's some universals that you just can't break, like loading the spine in a flexed or extended position, or you know, scapular retraction and depression. There's a lot of common things we see in professionals or anyone going through the assessment, but in the same way everyone's body is unique, our goal is to create a unique and customized program for that specific individual. And we're very good at kind of hitting two birds with one stone, and what I mean by that is we can work on strength training, a competent area of your body, but also increasing the mobility, as you suggested, maybe if there was a hamstring flexibility issue, we can kind of work on both of those things within a program.
Right.
And so that becomes very important. So regardless of whether your goals are increasing flexibility, rehabilitation of a joint, or essentially increasing your balance, which really goes into proprioception and repetitious movement in terms of making that action potential in your body flow faster, all of those things go into your program, and you really can't neglect one at all,
Right, yeah, and that's what we were kind of talking about earlier, was just that neuroplasticity topic in general, from a standpoint of, while we want to make sure that we work on the movements that the individual maybe scored the lowest on the functional movement screen, we want to still do everything, the whole body, but then also do repetitions of what they're the weakest in, so that we make sure that there's a neuro component of that, a brain to body, as I like to talk about with a lot of my clients, where if we do the repetition over a 3 or 4 week period, they start to understand it, and you're not correcting them as much on their technique and their form.
Yeah.
So just kind of speak to that a little bit, adding on just your experiences that you've had, successful experiences working with either the athletic population or just the average, the 50-year-old or 55-year-old that is looking to increase strength, and just your programming with that.
Yeah, well, I'll take that question in 2 parts. In the first part, it's like what the functional movement screen does is it allows us to get to the greatest limiting factor of a person's overall movement. So essentially, it's almost like if you're putting a fire out, you really want to put it out at its source rather than just at the top. And that's what we're doing with the functional movement screen, and then also the corrective exercise algorithm, is if we can correct the source of a dysfunction, then it may have a positive cascading effect on other joints. So for us, it's all about working smarter and not harder. Now, as we kind of talk more about corrective exercise, dabbling into psychology a little bit, they say there's 3 phases of learning. There's cognitive, associative, and autonomous. And practically what we see on the floor, for example, if I had someone running through an agility ladder, the first time they do it, they're in their cognitive phase, they're messing up a lot, they don't know the pattern specifically. It would be very tough for them to multitask and have a conversation with you at this period. 2 weeks later, they hit the associative phase. In the associative phase, they're a lot better at it. They may not be perfect, but they can answer simple questions or potentially multitask while doing this drill on the agility ladder. And before we progress an exercise, we want that client to hit the autonomous phase. And the autonomous phase essentially means that you can do this exercise. It is a pattern. You've done it to the point where it's like you can have a conversation with your personal trainer about what you did the weekend before and still execute the exercise perfectly. So these are the stages of learning as personal trainers that we like to see within our clients before just jumping up an exercise or progressing it. We want to make sure they competently know how to perform the prerequisite before getting to that progression.
Right, and we've talked a lot off air too about just the education component of it, and almost training our clients as if we want them to be their own personal trainers, and how important that is, that we are educating on proper form and proper technique, and that we maximize the effort out of the exercises that we're doing too. And you hit that very well, I thought, as far as being able to do those in progressions. Yeah. And if someone doesn't meet that next progression, then maybe we need to take a step back with them and maybe, okay, we need to revamp this a little bit, show it on a more basic level, or we need to take a step back and regress the exercise too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just as everyone's body is unique. Sometimes a certain corrective exercise might not be as effective for one person as it would the other. So that's where really taking copious metrics and notes comes into play, and being able to make those decisions as to whether this is working and keep it, or it's not working and let's readjust the program. I really tell people their program is not a one-set thing, it's more of a revolving door that's constantly being revamped.
Yeah, and I think lastly, I know you've gotten a lot of experience working with athletic population, elite athletes.
Yeah.
A lot of our clientele, they come in and they're athletes and they may think that they have good either core strength or they have good agility, strength within their legs, but then we do the functional movement screen and sometimes we see those limitations pop out.
Yeah,
and they're kind of, and even the athletes are a little bit surprised of some of the results.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, of your experiences where maybe you've worked with a higher level athlete.
Yeah.
And then you correct some of those, even fine tuning some things with them.
Absolutely. I've worked with professional WNBA players. I've also worked with some Olympians. And you're absolutely right. They are kind of, surprised to see that they do have certain limitations or certain asymmetries. But if we think about it, some of these athletes, will take a basketball player, for example, who shoots 1,000 shots a day. That repetitious movement, if they are right-handed, would create an asymmetry between the right and left side unless they were doing the same thing on the left every day. That's the beauty of the functional movement screen. I've found that actually high-profile athletes are even more critical of their bodies, and they are the ones who are actually, investing in a lot of services to improve those limitations, more so than the general population. But that's where the functional movement screen comes into play. Not only will it identify someone's greatest limiting factor, but it creates a plan of action to correct it moving forward. It also gives us a common language to speak with, like physical therapists and chiropractors as well, because there are things that may be outside of Chris and I's scope, but we know the right people to refer you to, and essentially work in a synergistic fashion to get you to your goals in the fastest way possible. The functional movement screen brings a lot to the table, but as I said, the assessment itself is what unifies the trainers. But as long as the programs are within safety and within reason, we support our trainers in having different niches because there's the right trainer for every individual out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what sets us apart here at the Indianapolis Healthplex, after talking about the functional movement screen, is the fact that we set up specific exercises based off the sports that you're into, which I think is very unique, and there's different theories on that. But the other day I was training a guy who was in his 50s, wanted to get back on the tennis courts, and had some limitations, had addressed his ankle pain that he had earlier, talked to his physician, had gotten all that cleared, and then came to see me to do more agility kind of stuff with him. And that's where the fun kind of comes in for us sometimes, when we're throwing a tennis ball and we're doing agility things and balance training and lateral movement that are specific to the sport that they're in too, which is
the true definition of functional, right?
Yeah.
It is training someone specifically for the movements that they're going to be doing. And that's where the functional movement screen does become great. Talking to a professional golfer and increasing their drive by simply increasing the mobility in their shoulders, or even something as simple as increasing the depth in a person's squat so they can sit down and play with their grandchildren. I mean, these stories are moving and everyone has something unique. But I really encourage everyone, I say a good trainer will always work their way out of a client's life. And what I mean by that is it's our goal at Indianapolis Healthplex to educate our clients and provide them with as much information as they need to carry on their fitness routine moving forward independently. And that's where the education and the functional movement screen come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested, if you're a member or even a non-member, we'd love for you to reach out to us here at the Indianapolis Healthplex. With everything that we talked about today, if you guys have any questions, feel free to comment in our comment section down at the bottom. We can talk about different topics that you guys want us to talk about. We can bring in different health professionals too. We're open to doing that, and definitely getting anyone set up with this health risk assessment that we keep talking about. Like we mentioned, For all members, it is absolutely free, one-on-one session for an hour to go through that health risk assessment, the SICA scan, and then the functional movement screen like we talked about today. So it's something that we definitely encourage everyone to sign up with. So we just want to thank Adnan today for joining us.
Appreciate
A
it.
lot of good information.
Yeah.
We'll keep it low as far as just doing not too many minutes today, and we'll maybe get you back on for another one here because there's a lot of good talk that could be involved with this. So.
Hey, my pleasure.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Got it.